Hello and welcome to Masterclass of Coming Out of Babylon and Preparing the Way Back to the Ancient Paths, based on Jeremiah 6:16, where we find that Yah asks us to come back to the ancient paths, but many would not walk therein. And my mom was actually the one, Jenny Mixon, who initially had gotten this specific scripture. And we thought it very applicable to things that Yah had already been showing us. And so we have kind of just kept studying. But Jeremiah 6:16 says, "Thus says Yahuwah, stand ye in the ways and see and ask for the ancient paths. Where is the good way, and walk therein, and you shall find rest for your souls." But they said, "We will not walk therein." And so in studying scriptures, I think we find it a common thread where our Father has a good intent for us, or even Jesus says, I wish that you would choose life. We have life and death presented before us. He wishes that we would choose life. But for some reason, our flesh is always wanting to go against the grain, be disobedient, be complaintive. And really all the Father wants to do is bring us into his family and show us his ways to protect us and keep us from veering off the path of righteousness and the path to be with him for eternity. So we hope that this presentation and this masterclass really helps you to just find out where you have may not had the right understanding taught to you. And many of us, what we're finding, there's been a lot of things passed down to us, ideologies and traditions that are not biblical, and they're also not in line with what the Father has asked of us. And that is not to partake in the ways of the pagans. And so we're also going to look into that, into history and how these things evolved and are now submersed in our culture as a regular tradition that is not even to be questioned. Another scripture that I'd like to bring to mind that kind of helped birth this ministry was Isaiah 58:12. I felt long ago that the Lord had called me to be a repairer of the breach. However, at that time, I wasn't sure what that meant. But Isaiah 58:12 says, "And they that shall be of you shall build the old waste places. You shall raise up the foundations of many generations, and you shall be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of the paths to dwell in." So remember, we were just talking about the ancient paths. Well, that's what we're doing here, is we're restoring the ancient paths. And we are going back to a place that the Father originally intended for us to be, and that is in his perfect covenant. So I always thought of the word breach being a gap in a wall, a barrier, that second definition that we see there. I don't think I have my screen shared. Let me share my screen really quick. Jenny, can you see that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So, but I want us to pay careful attention to the first definition of what breach means: an act of breaking or failing to observe a law, agreement, or a code of conduct. And so what do we know to be a repair of a breach, repair of the law, and or an agreement or a covenant in our case, a repair of the covenant? And we have found that there's been a great disservice in separating the Bible from an Old Testament to a New Testament, when it really should be a fluid throughout Old Covenant, New Covenant. And it's a renewed covenant. It's not even a new covenant. It's the old covenant renewed. And that's where Yeshua comes in, or who we know as Jesus. And we're going to get into that too. So why is it important that we know what the enemy is up to? And when I first started out in this journey of just the Lord speaking to me and it's leading me and showing me things that I was not seeking for, I did not want to know, nor did I care to know what the enemy was up to. I just wanted to focus on the positive. God is good. And if we believe and have faith, then all things work together for good for those who love him and are called according to his purpose, right? So that verse has a tendency to want to kind of make us turn a blind eye to evil and wicked and just kind of pretend that it doesn't exist. However, the view that we have taken on of just kind of being oblivious has really done us a great injustice in regards to spiritual warfare. And the math and in the art of war, it's always good to know the strategy of your opponent so that you can counteract with an effective attack. And so what the Lord has shown me and taken me back to the ancient paths is that it is really about preservation of the truth. And the enemy is out to destroy the truth. And that's why we are called to be the light bearers. We are called to bear the light and to not be hidden, to not be extinguished, and to die for our beliefs. So we have to be extremists. And I believe that the current situation that we're seeing in state affairs in our country and in our government, and why the Christians are being silenced, is because we have lost our voice, because we have turned a blind eye, and because we have taken on the message that Jesus loves everyone. We have failed to protect, and we have failed to guard the truth. And so now what we have become is a watered down body of believers that have a form of godliness, but really truly lack power thereof. And so we have to remember that Yeshua, he said that he came to bring a sword, to separate the wheat from the tares. He didn't come to bring peace. And he said this out of his own mouth. But we portray him as this peace giver and this lover. He is a lover of our souls. And Yah, our Father, desires that everyone would come to know him. But he also says that the path is narrow and that few find it. And so Yeshua has come for those that do find it, and he will be separating the wheat from the tares. When he says that I came to bring a sword and not peace, that word translated in the Greek literally means division. And so while we're preaching a message and a gospel that says that we should love everyone and accept everyone into the fold, this could not be further counter from what is biblical. So I'm going to read a little excerpt out of Jude. The Lord told me a while ago to study the book of Jude and take every word of it serious for today. And so I was obedient in doing that. And what I found was that there are great commonalities between what Jude was writing of and his time in this present day. Jude 1:3 says, Beloved, when I gave all diligence to write unto you of the common salvation, it was needful for me to write unto you and exhort you that you should earnestly contend for the belief which was once delivered unto the Kodashim. The Kodashim are the saints, or those who have been called to be set apart, or what would commonly be called Christians today. And we're going to get involved in understanding where Christianity came from in the next couple of classes. But to note particularly here, we are the Kodashim. We are the saints. We are the called apart, set apart ones who are called to be sanctified, holy, and walking in righteousness. Jude 1:4 says, For there are certain men that crept in unawares, who were before old ordained to this condemnation. Right here, we have to understand this is so old. The enemy is so old. We are so brand new. So all we know is what we know that's been taught to us and what we've experienced in our own personal lives. Okay, so then we go to study ourselves approved. And I like to tell a story here about a generation of women who cut the ends off of their ham. And daughter, one day she was in the kitchen with mom and she said, Mom, why do you cut the end off the ham? And she said, well, I don't know. Grandma always did it. Call grandma and ask her. So daughter calls grandma. Hey, grandma, why did you always cut the end off the ham? She said, well, honestly, child, I don't know. My mom always did it. So I did. I'll call her and ask her. So she calls great grandma and asks her, why did you always cut the end off the ham? And she goes, well, honey, I didn't have a pan big enough to fit the ham. So I had to cut the end off. Well, these newer generations had a pan big enough to fit, and if not, they had the money to go buy one. So they were cutting the end off their ham and wasting perfectly good meat, or saving it for another meal, hopefully. But because it was a tradition that had been passed down to them and they blindly followed it, not really ever asking why or seeing if it was applicable to their present day. So because of this, and because we've let men into our churches that were ordained of old from many, many years ago, when Satan fell, they are currently infiltrating the church and turning the grace of Yah into lasciviousness. Now, lasciviousness is a form of lust that can be attached to a sexual desire, but the root of it is lust. And what do we see going on in the common Christian church today, in the Catholic Church and institutions as such, is a lust, is a perversion of the truth, and a just a desire for over-desire for big buildings, material things. And what that ends up doing is denying Adonai Yahuwah or Adonai Yahusha HaMashiach, because it's not in line with who their character is. So a while ago, the Lord spoke to me about studying witchcraft, and I was not looking for it at all. Had no desire ever to dabble in the darks, except for when I was younger. I did play with some Ouija boards and stuff, and the ramifications of that was not good. I believe I really opened myself up to some dark things spiritually at that point when I was younger. But these forces are nothing to be taken lightly. Yes, Yah is sovereign, and he is mighty, and he is able to overcome any wicked principality. However, he has to be invited into certain situations. And if we are not operating in the fullness and awareness of what kind of enemy we're counteracting or battling, then we're leaving ourselves vulnerable with just holes in our force fields that where Yah cannot really protect us, because we're not walking in truth, or we're not walking in righteousness. And so these open up doors for the enemy to throw those fiery darts. You remember it says that he seeks to devour. He's like a roaring lion. And so with studying witchcraft, I realized how dark and how real dark forces are. And because many of us don't pay them attention and think because we don't pay them attention that they're just going to go away, this is not the case. We have to counter them with biblical spiritual warfare. So one of the things that I am going to expose in this first class is the American government. I used to be never really a patriot, I would say, but very proud American, and still am a proud American. We have had blessings beyond the imagination here in this nation. However, we also have been told that the foundation of this nation was founded on godly biblical principles, but unfortunately, this could not be further from the truth. And so this video is going to give you an excellent just rundown of some historical things that brought America to pass, and then some rituals and things that have been consistently practiced throughout the history of our nation. So I am going to now share this video. It's about 2 hours and 17 minutes long. Tonight, for time's sake, we're just going to watch an hour and have some discussion. And then we are going to watch the other hour next week.
I'm Justin Fall.
And I'm Wes Fall, and we are the Fall Brothers.
We would like to personally thank you for taking the time to watch our newly released director's cut version of Belly of the Beast. This was by far one of the most challenging films we've ever made, and we want to encourage everyone to watch this with an open mind, as the contents of this film will definitely challenge much of what you've been taught and even believed over the years.
This is a one-of-a-kind film that exposes the deep state in a way that hasn't been done before, and we will present many images and visuals that have long been lost in the black vault of historical revisionism. We recommend that you take notes and research every claim for yourself. Please, don't just take our words at face value.
This film contains some graphic material that may be unsuitable for younger viewers. Unfortunately, the graphic nature of this content is necessary in exposing the harsh realities of the film's claims, so parental guidance is strongly suggested.
We thank you again for your time and interest in our director's cut version of Belly of the Beast.
We've got a lot to cover, so let's go ahead and start the adventure.
We've been told that America is a Christian country from its origin, one nation under God. We've been taught that our government is for the people, by the people, and that our party system is set up to provide checks and balances. We've been sold the American dream of fireworks on the 4th of July, manicured lawns and white picket fences. We've lived with the mindset of safety and peace, trusting that our leaders are protecting and preserving our best interests. But what if it's all been just a grand deception? What if the God, worshipped in secret by government leaders in our nation's capital, is in fact our enemy? And many of our leaders have been venerating him secretly through arcane rituals, setting the scene for the incarnation of this ancient entity. What if everything we thought we knew about this great nation was designed to bring about the greatest conspiracy of all time? A conspiracy for the souls of humanity. What if I told you that America was founded by the darkest elite secret societies, and that there are still powerful remnants, active elements, controlling hands in high positions, carrying this torch, and that your apple pie was just a dream?
It is in America that the transformation will take place, and has already commenced.
World democracy was the prominent dream of the classical occult philosophers, and it was well known in their circles that thousands of years ago, the mystical orders of Egypt knew of the Western Hemisphere, and specifically a great continent. This continent was America. It was during this time that a bold resolution was made, declaring that this Western continent should become the site of the coming philosophic empire of the world. Now, scholars and historians can't agree on specific dates for this arcane declaration, although it would have been before the time of Plato, based on veiled references in his works.
The Greek biographer Plutarch described ancient voyages that portray this great continent in the Western Hemisphere being visited by the ancient Greeks. They not only reached our shores, but explored part of the Great Lakes area. Through symbolism they preserved in mythology, their knowledge of this very continent we call America, which the ancient polytheistic Greeks called blessed. This continent was anciently set apart for coming generations in the great human experiment of the democratic commonwealth. This great continent would become the New World, the New Atlantis, or what Jeremiah the prophet called the hindermost of the nations.
There has seemingly always been religious persecution, specifically involving the dark arts of magic and occult mystery schools throughout the centuries. It was common for kingdoms to outlaw these types of practices in the public eye for different political reasons. So in order for a nation to fulfill the esoteric prophecies, it must first offer freedom to practice the old religions of the world. Furthermore, when we consider this freedom of religion declared in America's foundation, we now understand that this had absolutely nothing to do with protecting Christianity, as we've been told, but was rather a cloak for the occult societies to freely advance, officiating their long prophesied philosophic empire of the world. America would be a soil rich for the dawning of the new order of the ages, or as declared by our founders, the Novus Ordo Seclorum.
The occult was spreading quickly in the West by the late 1600s, drawing many settlers from all over the world, offering them a safe haven to seek out and practice the ancient arts. Many forms of Babylonian and Egyptian magic astrology, Kabbalah, polytheistic paganism, and the likes of such were prevalent. And of course, Christianity was also present. In addition, a hybrid mystical version of Christianity was quite popular in those days. Moving forward on the timeline, the celebrated founding fathers by majority are known to have been a mixture of secret society occultists, deists, and even universal spiritualists with a side of Christianity. They tactfully aimed at cultivating the prophesied New World, where the new order of enlightenment would radiate as a beacon of light to all the nations of the world.
Interesting is the belief that America is the land previously known in the ancient world as Atlantis. But regardless if there's any truth to that, we have an ironic bit of overlooked history I think we should mention here. Many early 19th century observers held with a high regard this idea that there was an advanced civilization widely populating the North American continent long before the American Indians ever did. As a matter of fact, in 1811, the governor of New York, DeWitt Clinton, told the New York Historical Society that this was a well-proven fact. And he even went on to explain that there are numerous remains of ancient fortifications that were found in this very country, America, demonstrating a population that far exceeded that of the Indians. But of course, this type of history tends to get covered up and lost in an age of cognitive dissonance.
It's important to note that the 19th century American Iroquois Indians were reported as having esoteric fraternities, or what we would call occult secret societies, among their tribes. This is yet another historical fact that was documented by Governor DeWitt Clinton. Researchers explained these esoteric Indian fraternities to be a form of ancient Freemasonry prevalent in the land. These claims were taken seriously when the Seneca leader, known as Red Jacket, as well as other New York area Indians, were seen wearing Freemasonic-style medals in the shape of the square and compass. This is a fact well documented in the 1903 New York State Museum monograph titled Metallic Ornaments of the New York Indians by archaeologist William M. Beauchamp.
So we see the Luciferian god of Freemasonry thriving in the land, being worshipped and served here long before the founding fathers had officiated the American government. It would seem that neither the early settlers nor the Indians had brought Lucifer worship to the land, but were rather continuing the occult traditions of the prior civilizations of this great Western continent. Multiple civilizations, ancient and modern, living and acting under the same demonic principality, all on the same American soil. This idea is further vindicated as we look to the hidden history of the name America.
Tom Horn explains in his book Zenith 2016 that there is much encoded in the name America. Pointing to the works of famous theosophists and historians, he breaks down rich historic clues into America's secret destiny, hidden within the name. This title America is, according to some people, the title from which America is taken. It is related to Mesoamerican history, serpent worship, and giants. And according to Freemasonry, connects the founding of the United States and its capital designers with wisdom derived from the fallen flying seraph.
According to Manly P. Hall, Amaruka is linked directly with the plumed serpent god known as Amaru. This god was worshipped throughout the Americas under different names. He was the god Quetzalcoatl in Mexico, Gucamatz in Quiché, and in Peru, he was called Amaru. From Amaru comes the word America. Amaruka is literally translated land of the plumed serpent. These ancient American cultures had priestly orders and ceremonies, and according to Hall, these ceremonials are of most importance to students of Masonic symbolism and mystical philosophy, since they in fact establish beyond doubt the existence of ancient and divinely instituted mystery schools on the American continent.
It bears irrefutable evidence as to why the most notable occultists of centuries past had declared America to be the fulfillment of this ancient esoteric prophecy, becoming the world democracy capital, and the manger, if you will, awaiting the coming dark Messiah who will wage war against the saints. This secret destiny was very much in the minds of many of the founders of the United States and can easily be seen throughout our brief history as a nation.
The foundation of America, just like the rest of the foundation of the rest of the Western world, is built around two kinds of building blocks. There is an occult, esoteric set of building blocks, going back to the Enlightenment era, going back to the age of the Renaissance, pulling from ancient mythology. But there's also another form of building block. It is a Christian ethic. There is a Christian Judeo ethic that's also a part of the Western world. And it's the tension between those two sets that we see coursing through America, coursing through all of the world, really. But America is really unique because it's a clash point. You can travel around this country and there's a multitude of Christian crosses everywhere. America's a land of Christian crosses. And then you go to your state capitals, you go to your national capital, you go to your large skyscrapers, and you've got deity statues, you've got monuments erected to pagan gods and goddesses. And so while Christian crosses dot America, representing that Christian ethos that's a part of the American culture, there's also this sense of an occult, esoteric foundation. And the symbols of your democracy, the symbols of your national flavoring is built around monuments and statues representing deities from the ancient world. There's a paradox in America.
Well, I think in the birth of America, they had, no question, Freemasons and others involved in the very beginning, and there were other secret societies besides them. So you have that intertwined in the birth of America anyway, and that was by design.
There was an occult history and destiny, even before 1776. The belief on the old world was that the United States could and would be a new Atlantis based upon the writings of Plato and also by the writings of Sir Francis Bacon. All of this information from the old world was inculcated in the design of Washington, D.C. There was an occult destiny and secret information that would influence the future of the United States.
One of the mystic prophets in the modern fulfillment of this destiny, and we've mentioned him before, was Manly P. Hall. Hall is considered to be the most influential Freemason of the 20th century. Hall was not just an entry-level Mason. He was actually a 33rd degree known as a Grand Sovereign Inspector General in the Luciferian craft.
Manly P. Hall believed that America had a secret destiny, that America is a special nation, that America was somehow set apart to lead the world forward with a new way of viewing not just itself, but viewing the world as a whole. Manly P. Hall had an incredible background in terms of esoteric understanding and occult philosophy. The work he did on Freemasonry, the work he did on occult philosophy, still today forms a very powerful foundation for the esoteric beliefs of various secret orders. Manly P. Hall had this incredible sense that America is a shining city, a city that all the world can look to. Now, he said it all throughout his writings. There's this illustrative model that America is this shining city, this beacon for the world.
Hall knew that the ancient writings all pointed forward to America becoming the philosophic empire that would be the pinnacle of the new order of the ages. By the time of Hall's life, it was already well known that the architecture in D.C. was predominantly reconstructed pagan temples of the old world, built to revive the power of the old gods, very similar to Vatican City in Rome. We're dealing with replicas of ancient ritual chambers and monuments erected on strategic street layouts that form magic symbols required for high-level sorcery.
Washington, D.C. was designed by L'Enfant, a Frenchman that was hired by George Washington. And he had some rather bizarre ways of looking at things. You know, if you were up on an airplane, of course there weren't any at that time, but you would see the crosses and the types of shapes that are really reminiscent of some ancient, rather occultic figures and histories, which doesn't surprise me. That has attracted Washington, that is, people that have that particular proclivity over the years, which is why they have a giant Wicca community, and then of course a lot of demonic activity. Why I refer to Washington as the most evil place in the world.
The architecture is by design in Washington, D.C. I mean, you've got individuals that were designing occult symbolism, and again, it's done in a very big and broad way. I mean, it's almost like you got a you've got to be up in the sky to look down at it. You've got to understand the symbolism. That's all about hidden symbolism. You're talking even buildings that would be spiritually charged. They represent something. They, just like the temple in the Old Testament represents, things concerning God, concerning heaven. The Spirit of God guided the folks in Exodus to actually build those things to represent. So it's the alternative. It's the other side. It's them representing another reality. It's on the other side of the fence, spiritually speaking. It draws power. If they're spiritually guided for the architecture, then they're going to be drawing the powers. Ultimately, it involves the spirits that have guided them to take precedence territorially. We don't understand that a lot, but it's all about that unseen spiritual side that has guided them. That's the big issue.
To further investigate, we headed to Ground Zero to meet up with Tom Horn and discuss some of the secrets of popular American symbols and their connections to the ancient past.
44 signers at least of the U.S. Declaration of Independence were Freemasons. They were committed to an esoteric plan. You had Europeans that were influencing the early founding fathers here. Why? Because they had this deeply held occult idea that was based on Bacon's New Atlantis, right? That at one time, in fact, by the way, Bacon wrote that he thought the original Atlantis might have been right here, where Washington, D.C.'s capital city is now. Wow. And that this is where it would be rebuilt. This is where it would rise from the ashes, right? To become an occult democracy dedicated to all of the ancient pagan gods. Now, whenever we talk about this kind of stuff, I doubt that most of the people that are walking around us here in the Washington Mall have any clue the forethought that went in to the way this design is laid out, with the obelisk standing in our background. In the other direction, the U.S. Capitol dome. What this symbolism all means had to do with their dream of building a new occult democracy that would once again give honor to the ancient pagan gods. And in fact, as you know, you can go on the official Library of Congress website and you can read an article called The Most Approved Plan. Right. In fact, all of the original paperwork is right over here in the Library of Congress, right? And what does it say? It says that they advertised to all these engineering firms around the world, France, America, right? For somebody to come up with a plan about how the capital city, which Jefferson named the capital city after Capitoline, the ancient Roman city over which Jupiter was the god that ruled all of the other gods. And so they advertised this engineering plan, and all these firms around the world turned in their submissions. They all wanted to get these lucrative Washington contracts, right, to build these buildings and edifices. Thomas Jefferson rejected all of the plans, and our own Library of Congress website tells us why. Because he specifically wanted to shepherd a plan in which this would be built based on the old Roman pantheon and dedicated to all pagan gods. That's what they want, and that's what they built, and that is the reason why, as you and I are standing here in the mall today, you have this obelisk. Now, it's the largest obelisk of its kind in the world, standing 666 inches high, 666 inches long, each measurement at the perimeter of the base. But it's really based on ancient Egyptian mythology, the original design of which, an obelisk facing a dome, the dome of Isis, the temple of Isis, right? It was a generator. It had alchemy involved with it. The purpose of it was to draw up from out of the underworld the seed of Osiris, so that Osiris could take his rightful place in the Pharaoh, and now Egypt has divine representation. Now this is based on the myth of Osiris, the dying and rising god, and his sister, wife, the queen of magical skills, Isis, right? Right. And so the way the story unfolds in antiquity is that the evil brother Set gets 72 conspirators. Now we know this number 72 is very important. We'll see it inside the U.S. Capitol dome in the 72 pentagrams. They waited 72 years from the signing of the Declaration of Independence to dedicate this obelisk to George Washington, right? So this number turns up over and over. 72 cosmocrators, evil spirits, help Set kill Osiris. They capture him, they nail him up in a box, and then chops him into 14 pieces. This also plays out, by the way, in American history. Chops him into 14 pieces, throws those pieces into the Nile River. Isis searched the banks of the Nile River, but she's only ever able to find 13 of the 14 pieces of Osiris. The missing piece is his phallus, his male organ. So what does Isis do? She takes the 13 pieces of Osiris and she affixes them together in a more perfect union. In the United States of America, we take the 13 colonies and we bring them together to form a more perfect union. And right here in the capital city that represents that union, we also recreate the dome and the obelisk.
So ancient Egyptian religion is literally woven into the fabric of the foundation of America. There is absolutely no denying the connections and symbolism between the two. But it doesn't end with symbolism. This actually plays out in ritual. Right as Tom was getting to the breakdown of the ritual on location, we were met with what was later determined to be high-level audio surveillance. Our wireless microphone frequencies were being tapped into, causing our transmission to suffer interference at times. What you are about to witness is the product of that interference.
Now, so important, by the way, was this story where Isis creates a magical obelisk to replace the missing part of Osiris's epiphallic corpse, right? She sits on, to be blunt, the obelisk on the corpse of her dead husband brother. And Isis fashions the very first ever raising of Osiris enchantment ceremony, in which she calls forth the seed of her dead husband from up out of the underworld. It magically emits from the obelisk into her womb, and Isis becomes ever pregnant because she is constantly giving birth over and over again to the dying and rising god. Now, so important was that mythology, by the way, that it formed the center of the cosmology of all of ancient Egyptian magic, and then later into the mystery schools, Rosicrucianism, the Freemasons, right? So important was it that at the inauguration of every pharaoh who would take his role as the king of Egypt, during a festival called Opet, they would put the pharaoh on a barge and they would pull him up the Nile River. As he was on the Nile River, the laity of Egypt are walking along both sides of the river, right? And they're replaying the myth of Osiris and Isis. They take him to the largest religious complex ever built, the temple of Amun-Ra at Karnak, where he gets off the barge and he walks into the domed belly of Isis, the temple of Isis. And as he is standing in that domed building, looking out into the mall, into the courtyard where the obelisk is erect, and the masturbatory sun god Ra has rose up into the air so its heat can fall upon the obelisk to excite it, right? Mm-hmm. Inside the belly of Isis, the magicians of Egypt, and we know these guys had significant occult power, because when Moses goes down to face the Pharaoh to say, "Let my people go," they actually were able to recreate almost all of the miracles that God performed, as Moses is standing there with his shaft. So we know these guys had supernatural power. They recite the original raising of Osiris ceremony while the Pharaoh is standing inside of the dome. We don't know what exactly the language around that is, but we know it was preserved in the mystery schools. And across town from where we're standing right now at the Hera Dome, they claim that they continue to have this important language, the spells, the incantation for the raising of Osiris. Well, they would conduct that ceremony while the Pharaoh is standing there. The seed of Osiris would be drawn up from out of the underworld through the testes of the obelisk. It would magically emit into the ever-pregnant belly of Isis. and Pharaoh would become transmogrified. He entered into the building a man, he comes out of the building, he is a god. And all of Egypt celebrates because now they have divine representation. Now fast forward to this present day. The Freemasons openly admit that the obelisk, the dome, well, again, it's on the Library of Congress website. These are structures designed and dedicated to all of the ancient pagan gods. But how many Americans know that at the inauguration of every American president, while he is standing over here in the dome, the pregnant belly of Isis, looking out across the mall at the obelisk over here in the distance, that across town at the Herodome, the headquarters of the Scottish Rite Freemasonry 33rd degree, they are conducting the raising of Osiris ceremony in anticipation of the day that literally the spirit of Osiris, or who the Greeks would call Apollo, is going to rise up out of the underworld to become incarnate in a future American president who will take his rightful place according to the prophecy on the Great Seal of the United States, which both Franklin Delano Roosevelt and his vice president Henry Wallace wrote about. Wallace wrote about it in his biography, that he convinced Roosevelt, I think he was trying to take credit, but that he convinced Roosevelt that the prophecy on the Great Seal of the United States, the Novus Ordo Seclorum, was a Masonic prophecy pointing to a day in the future when the United States would rise up to take its rightful place as the capital of the New World Order, the fulfillment of the Sibylline prophecy that says, what? That Apollo is going to rise up from out of the underworld, take his place in a man, and give birth to a new golden pagan age. Literally, the generator to make that happen is what we are standing in the middle of today doing this recording. And if you go inside the Capitol Dome and look up into the underside of the pregnant belly of Isis, what do you see? The apotheosis of George Washington. Literally, apotheosis means to become a god. And what god is George Washington becoming? Walt Whitman, the famous American poet that is so connected to American history, said he's becoming the Osiris.
Freemasonry and the founding of America, there is a very important link between the two. Freemasons held a very important part in America's foundation. George Washington was a Mason in good standing. A number of the signers of the Declaration, your Articles of Confederation, a number of them were well-known Masons. A number of the generals in George Washington's army were also well-known Masons. America's founding is steeped in Masonic lore and Masonic history, but it's not just America's founding. That flavoring has flowed through America generation after generation after generation to the point where this country, the United States, has a Masonic saturation in its history, in the fabric of its culture.
When the Freemasons designed this majestic pagan city of D.C., they intended it to be their revived ritualistic chessboard, with all pieces in place for their scheduled conjurings, with the ultimate goal of awakening the spirit of Osiris, Apollyon, to one day inhabit their final world king. They have carried out this famed ritual with the inauguration of every U.S. president, firmly believing that the prophecies of America will in fact come to pass in the fullness of time.
So the founding of America was clearly the beginning of the ancient prophecies being fulfilled. The great blessed continent of the Western Hemisphere to become the philosophical democracy that would lead the world as a beacon of light into the new order of the ages. In order for this philosophical empire to bloom, there had to be two main prerequisites met: a safe haven that legislated and protected the freedom of all religious practices, and a zenith of the secret teachings of the old world. And that's where secret societies enter the stage.
Secret societies have existed among all people, savage and civilized, since the beginning of recorded history. It is beyond question that the secret societies of all ages have exercised a considerable degree of political influence.
Among some of the most influential of the Founding Fathers, we find secret societies which have remained in the shadows over the years, wielding their power and authority in American politics, culture, and religion. It's always been the goal of the secret orders to keep and maintain the ancient occult teachings and rituals while influencing the politics, religion, and culture of their day. Historically, the secret societies have seemed to always control the zeitgeist, or the spirit of the time.
Secret societies are groups of individuals who share commonalities, goals and visions of a united humanistic future of esoteric enlightenment. In other words, these groups are formed with a specific agenda of ecumenical unification of all faiths and creeds, with a common goal of global order. This once again projects the American doctrine, e pluribus unum, or out of many comes one, the land where all paths lead to God. We're told that we are one nation under God, but as we see, this is a nation of many faiths, and the God declared by the founders was clearly not the God of the Bible.
The God mentioned by the founders, and even referenced on our currency, is none other than the universal great architect entity, which high-level Freemasons reveal is actually Lucifer, the light bearer, the serpent god. This God accepts all faiths besides true biblical Christianity, and goes by many names across the cultures. This is another brick in the wall of understanding secret societies and how they are able to coexist as a large body, even having factions within.
The most notable secret societies that have influenced the occult New World system include the Freemasons, Traditional Rosicrucians, Hellfire Club, Skull and Bones, Ancient Mystical Order Rosicrucis, Ordo Templi Orientis, the Golden Dawn, and the Jesuits.
Seeing that America is the philosophical empire foretold by occultists of the ancient world, coupled with the fact that global decisions for order always have to be cleared via American politics and force, it is no surprise that politicians and corporate leaders from various secret societies, both foreign and domestic, all meet together for a blood sacrifice in a grove of biblical proportions every summer in California. Time would not allow for individual breakdown of every secret society in attendance. However, the common goals of these powerful groups are boldly plotted at this annual sacrificial gathering in the Redwood Forest. We're dealing with the United Nations of secret societies, if you will.
Bohemian Grove is where the walls come down between the societies, and the principalities emerge from the other side, as some of the most powerful world leaders devise the biggest moves and changes that will take place on the world scene.
Most people have heard about the Bohemian Grove, which is a yearly event that takes place in the redwoods of Northern California. What they don't know is that the Bohemian Grove is an adjunct to the Bohemian Club, which is in downtown San Francisco. Every year, they take this statue out of the Bohemian Club, a statue of St. John of Nepomuk from Czechoslovakia. Bohemia is in Czechoslovakia. They take this statue of St. John of Nepomuk, and every year they transport him from San Francisco to the Bohemian Grove up in Northern California.
St. John of Nepomuk is considered the patron saint of Bohemian Grove. And this particular statue of him that makes a pilgrimage every year depicts Nepomuk making the occult sign of silence, covering his mouth. Historically, Nepomuk suffered death for keeping the queen's confessional secrets. This level of commitment is a standard in secret societies. Death before disclosure of secrets. Being a member or a guest even at the Grove entails taking an oath of silence, and this is clearly portrayed in the statue of their patron saint.
The Bohemian Grove was a creation of members of the Bohemian Club that had hundreds of acres in the redwood forest of Northern California, and they would invite the greats and the near greats from across the world, all men, to these camps that were established there in the summer for several weeks. And they would meet together secretly, and they would brief one another about their government activities, the types of policies that were being worked from one government to another. We had former presidents that went there. And it's interesting, I know Colin Powell's emails after having gone to the Bohemian Grove were released by WikiLeaks. And he talked about this thing that they did on abandoning care. What it was, they had this giant owl that would be set up in the woods, and everybody would come and they would cast all their cares on this owl as a ritual of sorts. Now, you can dismiss that as silliness. These are grown men, most of them in their 50s, 60s, and so forth, but very influential people. And they did these sorts of things that have been fairly widely reported. And yet, I would argue that the decisions often made there, or the discussions made there, the camaraderie that was developed, would ultimately find its way into policy or financial decisions by governments and industry, because you had Hollywood magnates and you had the likes of the Googles of the world, and then, of course, all the way up to presidents and other countries. A bizarre secret society of sorts.
Bohemian Grove was astounding when I first heard about it. I never heard about it at all during the 80s or the first part of the 90s. So we have somebody that was coming to our offices seeking help, coming out of really, really dark satanic rituals and abuse and so forth. And one day they asked me, "Have you heard of Bohemian Grove?" I said, "No." They sat down and they wanted sheets of paper, big sheets of paper. They began to draw cabins and occult symbols, trees. Then they drew this like little lake area and then a big owl. And they had people in hooded robes throwing a man into the fires that showed people sitting across. So they began to draw all these pictures. They actually handed me a necklace with an owl that they said they wore in the 60s when they were there. So as they explained it to me in the early 90s, it was a place where political, military, media, and wealthy elite people were brought. Massive sexual decadence, sexual ritual, sexual exploitation. Kids, girls, boys were used. Some of it for bribing. So Bohemian Grove came out later on with the Alex Jones video. As soon as I saw it, I went back to the paperwork, went back to the individual that first shared it with us. This is on the Russian River in California. It's been there for a long time. It's connected to Skull and Bones. It's connected to other darker oriented, we'd call it secret society, but Bohemian Grove is literally no different than a high place of the Old Testament. It is an encampment for an idol of an actual demonic presence. That's what every idol is a representation of the actual presence of a territorial or a particular demon god, small g, that would rule a tribe or a family or rule a nation even. And that would be the image. So we have the owl there. They do a number of preparatory rituals, which is true among left-hand pathers. That this whole ritual leading up to this, it's one of many that is done, but before they can ever do it, and they never do it without acquiring, inviting, somehow they bring in the world elite. So we all know the stories now, even from the Bohemian Grove Club in San Francisco, and the names that have been put out, the lists that have been out, many, many other pictures are out now, old black and white pictures are out. It's been there a long time.
It's a place where you can come as Democrat or Republican. You can come as a financier. You can come as the CEO of major corporations and major companies. It's a place for networking. It's a place where you can come and, without the camera of the media on you, can discuss policy. And really what it boils down to is relationship building. Relationship building across all lines. It's that rubbing shoulders. It's that coming together. It's that place where they inspire one another and move agendas and ideas forward without the prying eyes of media, without the prying eyes of the public.
One of the most damning indictments of the realities of this Luciferian gathering, made up of all secret societies and political parties, celebrities and global leaders, would be the David Gergen Street interview. Gergen was the presidential advisor to Nixon, Ford, Reagan, and Clinton, and a longtime member of the Grove. This literally validates not only the existence of the Grove and the rituals, but also depicts the code of secrecy taken by its members.
I read a Washington Times article many years ago where you had a comment about the organization, and then now it's been in the Wall Street Journal, it's been in a lot of different newspapers, and that's the Bohemian Grove. And back in, 19 '96 when you joined as a Clinton advisor, the Republicans were criticizing you. Oh, what about Bohemian Grove? And then you countered them by saying, "Hey, I don't run around in the woods naked." What did that mean? Here is the before-mentioned Washington Times article where he said, "I didn't run around naked like they do."
I don't know what quote you're referring to. I'm not aware of any quote like that. Listen, I am a happy member of the Bohemian Grove. I like the folks who come there, and it's really inappropriate for me to talk about the group beyond that. Thank you.
Have you been there for the ceremony with the cremation of care?
Frankly, I don't think that's something I need to talk to you about.
Great owl of Bohemia, we thank thee for thy adjuration.
Have you been there for the ceremony with the cremation of care?
Frankly, I don't think that's something I need to talk to you about.
Really?
That's right.
Well, I'm Alex Jones, and I snuck in there in 2000. I'm the guy that blew it wide open and got the video, and it's been on national TV.
Well, I disrespect you for that.
You do?
I do.
But it's a lot of big public officials going in there. Don't we deserve to know?
I don't know anything about you, and I don't know anything about your film. But if you go in there with an understanding, you violated that understanding by releasing that film, and I don't respect you for that.
Really? But we have public officials.
I'm sorry. You took an understanding when you went in there that you would not do that film. And did you have an understanding when you went in there?
No.
Did you crash it?
Yes.
Yeah, and it has no trespassing signs there too, doesn't it?
No, they put them up after.
Oh, I'm
I
sorry.
just walked in.
I'm sorry, sir. I've been there before. I know what the circumstances are, and I'm sorry you violated the understandings. That was not a gentlemanly thing to do.
But what about the ritual? Is the ritual genuinely?
Sir, everything I don't owe you this comment.
I know. I appreciate
it. This is what's called ambush journalism, and I disrespect you for that as well. So thank you and goodbye.
Been in the ritual?
It's none of your damn business.
Oh,
right. Listen. You go around and make understandings with people and violate them. You ambush people on the streets, and that's inappropriate form of journalism. If you wish to practice that, that's fine, but don't ask others to respect you for it. If you want to, you can do. You're a free American, like anything you want. If you want to be uncivil and rude and ungentlemanly, that's up to you. But don't expect the rest of us to say, "Oh well, you're
there, Mr. Gergen."
I'm sorry, nobody sets policy in there. We try to be gentlemen, and obviously, you don't belong there.
Weaving spiders come out here.
The biggest issue is the ritual itself. People see the ritual, they hear the stuff. It's almost like a massive drama that's going on. It looks like a big dramatic thing when you hear the voice of the speaker, the person behind speaking about the cremation of care and be gone, and he screams all these things out. And then the audience of presidents and senators and the world's elite all begin to clap. First, we have to ask, who has the clout to bring world leaders, presidents, kings of the earth, media moguls, military generals? Who has the power to bring those people together in one location? Why would anybody, any human being, even if it was just a fake mock human sacrifice, who would go to that? So even if it was mock, even if it was fake, why would world leaders, powerful people, go there and applaud at the end if it was fake? Here's what I believe without question about Bohemian Grove. Some are there because they've been invited to be influenced. They're unwitting to what's going on. Many, if not most, are witting to what's going on. They know what's happening. When we found out the reasons for the ritual at Bohemian Grove, the human sacrifice that would go on, it's not Moloch, but it goes back to Sumer, more likely to Semiramis and the most ancient of the ancient gods, small g, and the ritual of a human to be offered. So that in a ritual, as I said earlier, when a ritual is done, it's done as inspired by that side to open a doorway, to cause a release, to grant the door, to open the door so they can come through. So the most important thing is not only who gets them to come, who designs this to be done, and what's the real reason? The real reason is similar to Revelation 16. When out of the mouth of the false prophet, the beast, the Antichrist and the dragon, come spirits sent to the kings of the earth to supernaturally gather them, to move them. You have a massively global scale, powerful ritual being done so that when that human being is thrown, and probably alive, maybe drugged, but probably alive, thrown into the fires, burned alive, then the demons that have been right at the doorway, all of a sudden the doorway, the curtains come down, and that presence by target goes to the audience there. So in the real Luciferians, the reason they're doing this, summoning spirits, sending it on to the audience, world leaders, for influence, for inspiration, for preparation, to move them in one direction. It is an astounding ritual. How could it be happening on U.S. soil? It's a global class ritual. It's a powerful high place sitting on U.S. soil.
Bohemian Grove is a high holy place for the shadow government and has been since its infancy. The occultist movers and shakers of the world have long found demonically charged power and comfort in the blood rituals amidst this brotherhood of brotherhoods. What was once considered a conspiracy theory, this shadow government, has now broken out into the mainstream under a different name, possibly to soften the blow of its exposure. This long-standing cabal of decision makers and policy setters, the hand behind the false flag terror attacks and sponsor of international terrorist groups, the shadow government is now known as the Deep State.
There exists in the world today, and has existed for thousands of years, a body of enlightened humans united in what might be termed an order of the quest. It is composed of those whose intellectual and spiritual perceptions have revealed to them that civilization has a secret destiny. The outcome of this secret destiny is a world order ruled by a king with supernatural powers. This king was descended of a divine race, that is, he belonged to the order of the illumined. But those who come to a state of wisdom then belong to a family of heroes, perfected human beings.
The Deep State is the political means to advance the agenda of secret societies. It's the hand that rocks the cradle, per se. It's the arm that gets things done. Controlling the narrative, both politically and culturally, the Deep State is the puppet master, regardless of the perceived party dominance. It enacts policies, it funds terror, creates social uprising, and even tailors the mainstream media, all with the goal of advancing the nations towards the one world system. Literally speaking, they are constructing the beast system.
It's really a clandestine type of network of people that are undercutting government. It really dates back to Mustafa Ataturk, the Turkish leader of 1923, when he used clandestine operations within government to preserve his own government. And more recently, of course, in this country, starting really during the election of 2016 for Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, we began to see evidence of what we've seen overseas in Turkey and other countries, and that is specifically a shadow government. But ultimately, I really see three levels. The first level of the deeper state is the political class, those people that we send to Washington for the U.S. Senate, the U.S. House of Representatives. And then, of course, you have the people that work for the federal government, for the president and his administration, the bureaucracy. If you listen to the likes of Bernie Sanders, the independent that ran for president, if you listen to Ted Cruz, the senator from Texas, or you listen to former President Jimmy Carter, they call it an oligarchy. In other words, only a handful of people truly run the government. They truly run the political establishment in Washington. And they operate based upon who's the biggest donor to their particular interests. So they refer to it as an oligarchy, a government of a few. Now, when you look at the bureaucracy, the people that are working for these political people in the first level, the bureaucracy is representative of, in some cases, people that truly try to run things from behind the scenes.
Many people are finally waking up to the existence of the deep state after years of calling it a conspiracy theory. But what most people don't realize is that this deep state, this shadow American government, goes all the way back to the very first president, George Washington, and the founding fathers.
If you go back to the very beginning of our country, the founders, there were 55 of those that attended the Constitutional Convention. The windows were locked, by the way, at the time when they were writing our Declaration and then our Constitution. Why? They didn't want the average citizen to listen in on the proceedings. It's because they were the elite of the time. They were an oligarchy, people that were unelected, people that were wealthy, mostly lawyers, that were really going to put together a government that was going to give us some liberty from the British and so forth, but a government that ultimately was very similar to what we found and left behind in Great Britain. It was bicameral, in other words, a Senate that was really like the House of Lords. Initially, it wasn't going to be voted down by the people. House of Representatives was really like the House of Commons, and it was organized accordingly. As you go through the litany of things that they put together, it was truly an oligarchy, though it gave us some liberty. It wasn't until Andrew Jackson was president and he formed the political parties that ultimately put together our current system that we found that the people began to have a voice. And I think that's critical to understand and appreciate, that the deep state was beginning to recede and the people were having influence over the direction of government. So you have that level. Then you have the people that are behind the scenes, what I call the second layer. Second layer are the influencers, the deep-pocketed wealthy people, the George Soroses of the world that donate $12 billion to non-government organizations that indeed influence our political class and our federal bureaucracy. Clearly, you have lobbyists, and there are thousands of them in Washington. You have non-government organizations that are so-called think tanks that produce papers, and academia that produce papers that are used to influence politicians and the bureaucracies on the policies that they want. Are they really reflecting the will of the American people? In many cases, I'd argue no, they aren't. You have secret societies. Now, I know that a lot of people don't quite understand and appreciate these groups. The Bilderberger Group, of course, they're an influence of great proportions. They, in 1991, recruited Bill Clinton, a lonely governor from the obscure state of Arkansas, raised him up, gave him a lot of money, and gave him a message, and that message was about trade. It was NAFTA, and he sold NAFTA as his agenda, and of course he sold a lot of other bad ideas as well. The Bilderbergers also raised up Barack Obama, gave him money, gave him media attention, and eventually the nomination from virtually nowhere. And of course he ruled with a very progressive agenda, which is what most of these globalists, most of these progressives have in mind at the second level, second layer. And then, of course, you have foreign governments that are part of the second layer of the deeper state. The Saudis have spent hundreds of millions of dollars lobbying Washington for its own political purposes. There are many, many others that are involved in this political influence class that is involved with Washington.
Before we get into what empowers the deep state, or the final level, we have to understand that their agenda is globalism. Globalism is described clearly in Daniel chapter 7 and Revelation 13 as the world system of which the Antichrist will take the reins. We're dealing with the indisputable objective of the secret societies, which further explains why the deep state is run by these very secret societies. Their aim is to build a Luciferian world kingdom, and they use democracy to spread their ideology upon the world stage.
The World Federalist Association is the longest-running pro-world government lobby group in the United States. It didn't start out under that name. Back in the 1940s and 1950s, it started out as the United World Federalists. Today it goes under a different name, Citizens for Global Solutions. But all throughout its history, the World Federalist Association and its international umbrella group, the World Federalist Movement, have been working towards the idea of a global government, a world government, a new world order. That is the language that comes through. Back in the year 2000, I attended the United Nations Millennium Forum. I went as an independent accredited expert. However, because I was a member of the World Federalist Association at that time, I'd attended a number of meetings, a number of their events, and had been given a membership by the organization. I quickly discovered when I was at the United Nations Millennium Forum that we were running the show, that the World Federalist movement was running the United Nations event that I was attending. I was part of Subgroup 6. Subgroup 6 was about restructuring world order. And so for the course of the week, we had panels and workshops and lectures and sessions, planning sessions, on things like creating a global taxation regime, developing an international military and police force, setting up a global parliamentary assembly. This is a very big idea. Because what we were doing was we were discussing the framework, the skeletal framework for literally a form of world government. What is a world government? A world judicial system, a world where we develop international law, a world military and police presence, a world executive. George Bush Sr. called it a new world order. That language, he used that language all the time. In fact, he was really well known for that phraseology. A lot of people even thought he was the one that brought up the term, that he somehow invented it. No, he was using an old phrase. Ronald Reagan talked about a new world order. Jimmy Carter talked about a new world order. FDR talked about a new world order. Back in the 1940s, the birth of various World Federalist organizations, including the United World Federalists, even churches were talking about world order. There were church crusades on world order. The Baptists were having crusades on world order. The Methodists were. They were doing letter writing campaigns to America's politicians, saying, as you guys work through the idea of a United Nations, this is in the mid-1940s, the later part of World War II, you need to develop this as an authoritative, effective, empowered international authority. And in fact, you can go back even earlier than that. You can go to World War I. Nicholas Murray Butler, the president of Columbia University, a man who could walk into the office of kings and prime ministers and presidents. He was Mr. International during World War I. He openly talked about a new world order. In fact, he described World War I as the destruction of the old order and a war for the new order. And what he described was the emergence of a world authority with an international judicial system, an international police presence, and world law. This really is the ultimate idea, the ultimate goal of the oneness of man, the oneness of the world. The phrase the New World Order doesn't end there. You can go beyond that, back all the way to 1873 with the founder of the Baha'i faith talking about the necessity of a new world order. And that new world order would have a world judicial system. It would even have a world city, a world headquarters. It would truly be one world. This big idea, this dream, has pulsed and beat within the heart of American elites for at least a number of generations. It goes back a long ways.
Globalism is about, to most people, it's about instant communication worldwide. It's about open markets around the world, open borders in many cases. But it's more nefarious than that. To me, it's about a religion of humanism, a religion that wants to reduce the Earth's population from the current 8 billion to 500 million, thanks to the likes of globalist Ted Turner. They believe that they're genetically predisposed to be the elite of the world and that they're going to run things. They trace themselves back to, of course, Friedrich Hegel, who is a 19th century German philosopher who believed in the zeitgeist, the spirit of the time. And they believed in, over time, that man's going to become perfect eventually. And as a result, they're going to be in charge of this perfect world. And it's, of course, going to be a one world government run by them. with far fewer of us than there are today. So the globalists are a pretty heinous group of people, and their ideology is typified by occultism, Luciferianism, and of course moral relativism. And so when I talk about the globalists, whoever they may be, the Kissingers, the David Rockefellers, the Hillarys, and so forth, I think psychopathic Luciferians, and that's their general ideology.
This is an idea that's been in circulation for a long time, and it goes into some pretty interesting areas. In 1951, the World Federalists met with Pope Pius XII, and in his speech to the World Federalists, talked to them in glowing terms that this was really a noble idea, that this was the direction that the world was going, that your program, gentlemen, is a necessary program. This is needed. The Pope's address in 1965 to the United Nations was also about the necessity of a world authority, and how what we really need is the world to come together through the United Nations to have a final world authority. The idea of a world authority is really intriguing. When I was at the United Nations Millennium Forum, one of the documents that was in circulation was Transformation of the World. It was put together by the head of the World Assembly of Turkic Peoples. He suggested a world king, a type of authority figure, somebody who could pull the nations together into one. We need some kind of world coordinator. Small doubt that the world does need a civilized coordinator in international relations and in settling global problems. More than that, this coordinator must be a stabilizing factor, actually, the last-ditch authority on the earth. He must win confidence of each man and each nation. People must be stark sure that this coordinator would solve any problem in a just and humane way, and one should be sure that in him he would find understanding and sympathy, that he would treat any nation as his own son, and that he is indeed the last resort. And the man should convince his terrestrial brothers therein by his practical deeds. ... Can the world community do without a coordinator? Definitely not.
This idea of uniting the world under one king, it's an ancient idea. The first to attempt this was Nimrod at Babel. They had a one-world religious system, government, language, and of course a king. This system was a foreshadowing of the coming Antichrist system and was even fueled by the entities of their esoteric religion. These are believed to be the very religious practices that comprise what we call today the Babylonian mystery schools, which are the religious beliefs and practices behind the various secret societies that drive the deep state. So it's really no surprise to see the same demonic entities that had fueled Nimrod's kingdom and motivated his actions alive and active today, fueling the deep state. The third level of the deep state is the unseen realm, or the spirit realm.
The third layer is what I call the unseen realm. This is the spiritual dimension. And of course, there are demonic players. There are spiritual activities that take place at the center of the universe, which I really believe happens to be in Washington, where the power is really focused. Where money and great power is exercised, inevitably there's going to be a spiritual war. Ephesians 6 being the example where powers and principalities are very much in play. And so the third layer, the unseen realm, is constantly influencing the second layer, the influencers, and the first layer, the political class and the bureaucracy.
In the deep state that I see right now, take one more step down, one more step down. In that next step down, you have the real operating deep state. There is no end to history without the supranatural side. There is no real alteration of the political world and a new world order and that kind. There is no new world order unless it's supernaturally based. 2,600 years ago, God said that there's a fourth kingdom. That's the deepest deep state you can get to. God already gave insight to that system being built and coming. It's very defined in Revelation 13 also. It's political, it's military, it's economic, and very clearly it's technological. If we're that close, Revelation 13, the biblical Greek word is anabano, they will rise as if out of nowhere, the 10 kings. And so we've been given great insight to an agenda. It's like God ripped open Hell's Kitchen, saw the blueprints, and said, hey, here's some of the sequence of satanic evolution.
So it's the unseen realm where the real plots are devised. The spirit realm is a supernatural place that exists outside of our 4 dimensions. This is the place where entities live, devils and demons. We're dealing with principalities, spiritual wickedness in high places. This is the realm that the deep state conspirators are tapping into. Their ideology is steeped in occultism, and their power is attained through performing rituals. Rituals are the heart and soul of the cabals of the world. Rituals are the keys that open the doors to the spirit realm.
Okay, so we'll stop there for now, and we'll finish the rest of it next session. But I will go back to the presentation here.
Can I just make a comment?
Absolutely.
You know, I know that we just watched a lot of, I guess, troubling stuff, especially if you've never studied or seen this before about the founding of America and the history behind it. And, while that is a large part of our founding, our history, I also believe that there is another side because, God never is out of control. He always it's always working towards his perfect plan. And John Adams, one of the founding fathers, said when they drew up the Constitution that the Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people, that it was wholly inadequate to a government of any other kind. And what he was saying was, as long as there was a moral fiber, an ethical fiber, based on, maybe even if loosely based on the Torah or the commandments or the covenants of God, then our government would work. But solely on its own, it's a secular entity. It was never founded as a religious entity. Mm-hmm. There was an element of people looking for religious freedom because they had been under state control freedom. Now, was that purely Christianity? No. I think people wanted the freedom to practice any type of religion that they wanted to practice. So there was that element that came here looking for the religious freedom. Some of them were Puritans, some of them were Christians, some of them, the different types of people. And I also believe, just in studies, and Pastor Isaac Heckman brings this out, he's with Assembly of Called Out Believers, that as part of God's plan, America was used, Israel broke into 2 separate nations, Judah and Ephraim, or Manasseh, or Israel. And Judah went into captivity, and Israel, the other 10 houses, went into captivity, and Judah was brought back after 70 years, but the other 10 tribes were dispersed throughout the world because they would not repent and return to God. And he multiplied that 7 times, and he told them they would. It was 390 years to begin with. He told them they would multiply it 7 times. Well, they didn't repent and return, so he did multiply it. And as a result, they were dispersed to every nation on earth, including North America. And they lost their identity. We've lost our identity. But he promised in the last days to bring them back. And so Pastor Heckman brings out and uses scripture, and I think does a very good job of it, which I don't have in front of me right now, but how God did use America to protect those lost tribes until that time of disbursement was fulfilled. And in the last days, he would regroup them back together, which is where we are now. So dark as it looks watching this video, I think there was also a bright side to America. And so I don't want to lose that either. You know, I don't want it to sound like it's just all doom and gloom and it was, you know, damned from the beginning. I want us to realize that, you know, God did have a plan in all this and still does. But I do believe that as we have lost that moral compass, that ethical compass, that we've given way more and more to these dark forces that were there from the beginning. And so they've been able to take more and more control until we're at a point now where we are looking at some pretty dark days. But if not now, when? And if not us, who? You know, these things have to happen in order for Messiah to return. So I just wanted to kind of bring that out because I don't feel like it's all doom and gloom as far as America goes. There was a purpose for her, a good purpose too. And so I just, you know, just wanted to kind of bring that out.
Thank you for that, Mama. So here we have just kind of a few more pictures of some Masonic stuff and some obelisks going on. We can see them pictured here at the Vatican in London and Washington. As we saw in the video, these obelisks are ancient, and what I've learned through my studies is they're actually built to resurrect supernatural frequencies. They transpond and actually talk to one another. It's a way that the supernatural can travel faster. And so these erected in all the major capitals around the world gives just the enemy easier access. And because we're oblivious to these structures and think that they're just monuments or pretty history, it's not just the case. They are utilized for other things. And then we see George Washington here. This is actually a statue that is in Washington, D.C., and they were not trying to hide anything by letting everyone know that George Washington was definitely a Freemason. So like Jenny had mentioned, you know, America was founded on, you know, not necessarily Christian principles. We wanted to have freedom of religion, and that's what we're seeing today. But with that, like also she mentioned, the loss of the moral compass, because not any other religion, quote unquote, and I hate even calling it a religion, not any other entity but the Most High actually has the ability to transform and change us from the inside out. So we talked a little bit in that video about the Statue of Liberty. These statues are also all over, and they are kind of known as, well, some people have related her to the one in Revelation 17:4, the woman who was arrayed in purple and scarlet in color and decked with gold and precious stones, pearls, having a golden cup in her hand. New York, it was the biggest queen of heaven and overlooking a real city called Babylon, New York. So Babylon, New York is a real town, and the Statue of Liberty actually looks over. So when and we're going to get into a little bit of the construction of our city, I mean of our capital, Washington, D.C. When it was constructed nearly close to replication of Vatican blueprint, and we're going to find out why. I'm going to show a short snippet of this video, as we also saw in the other video about the Georgia Guidestones. This is actually published on the History Channel. You can go find it under America Unearthed, the New World Order. This is from episode 2, and we're just going to watch a little bit about the establishing and the secrecy of the Georgia Guidestones.
No one else can ever know who I am.
So, who are you?
The history that we were all taught growing up.
You gotta lower your voice. I need the account number for that.
I need a banker.
No, and
How can I help you? So, you need money to build this?
No. I have the money. What I need is discretion.
Okay. Yeah. We can be discreet.
You can be discreet. Only you. No one else can ever know who I am.
So, who are you?
The history that we were all taught growing up is wrong.
Allison, I can't hear you.
Oh, okay, thank you. Okay, so we just see a snippet there of still to this day, nobody knows who built the Georgia Guidestones. You can do a Google search on Georgia Guidestones and actually see that there was a group of elitists that strongly believe that it is their responsibility to maintain humanity under 500 million people in perpetual balance with nature. They feel that it's their responsibility and their bloodlines to populate the earth, and they strongly believe in eugenics and ways of coming to depopulate the earth. Let's see. Back here. And then I'm just going to show us one more snippet of a video. Stop.
We can be
and this talks a little bit about America.
Hi, after watching the video, click the link in the description to download the program.
On December 6th, President Trump's words shook the world. He recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, and whether he knows it or not, fulfilled his part in a frightening biblical prophecy. Because according to the final chapters of the Bible, our country and every American citizen are about to face its greatest tribulation. Only the church leaders know the true meaning of this biblical prophecy that is encrypted in the writings of 4 ancient prophets, inspired to send a warning across the centuries to all true Christians and patriots. Therefore, before watching this documentary, be forewarned. You are about to see how all the world's leaders and their armies are silently playing their part in the lead up to the greatest and darkest event in human history, an event that may leave 290 million Americans dead in its wake. Once you witness the chilling evidence of the words of our Lord coming true, there is no turning back. It will simply be impossible for you to go about your daily life like you used to before knowing the truth. But take comfort, for it is God's will that you are here now so that you may have the time to prepare and maybe grant you salvation from all the wickedness of our times. And if you're feeling skeptical right now, let me ask you one question. Who would have thought 70 years ago that the Jewish people would have a country to call their own? Only those who read Ezekiel chapter 37. That is what the prophet wrote 2,700 years ago. The hand of the Lord was on me and set me in the middle of a valley. It was full of bones. Then he said to me, "These bones are the people of Israel, my people. I will take the Israelites out of the nations where they have gone. I will gather them from all around and bring them back into their own land. I will make them one nation in the land on the mountains of Israel." Word by word, the prophecy made by Ezekiel came true. In 1947, the nation of Israel was born after the horror of the Holocaust, symbolized by the Valley of Bones. Scattered for more than 2,000 years, the Jewish people come from all over the world into this new state and made it an economic and military power. Yet, it was not whole. Israel needed Jerusalem to become its rightful capital again, and that only happened with the support of President Trump. However, to the north of Israel, other biblical prophecies have come true. The prophets Isaiah and Jeremiah write about this Syrian civil war. This is what the prophet Isaiah says: Damascus will no longer be a city, but will become a heap of ruins. And these are the words of Jeremiah: Damascus has become feeble. She has turned to flee, and panic has gripped her. Anguish and pain have seized her. Surely her young men will fall in the streets. For 5,000 years, the capital city of Syria stood as one of the oldest and most prosperous cities in the world. But the civil war began in 2011 and turned it into a ruin. Not only do the prophets talk about the war, but also the refugee crisis and the deaths of its men fighting for one side or the other. The army of Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad has been fighting the rebels backed by the United States, Israel, Turkey, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia, and ISIS terrorists. In 2015, Bashar al-Assad was at the brink of total defeat. Yet exactly at that time, another biblical prophecy was fulfilled. Ezekiel 38 tells of Russia coming to the border of Israel. The word of the Lord came to me: Son of man, set your face against Gog of the land of Magog. I will turn you around, put hooks in your jaws, and bring you out with your army. In the latter years you will come into the land of those brought back from the sword, and gathered from many people on the mountains of Israel. One only has to look at the map of the world as it was known at the time of the prophet to understand. To the north of the Caspian Sea, we find the people known as Magog, inhabiting the land known as Rosh. Over time, the ancient name of Rosh became current-day Russia. Twice, Ezekiel says that Magog will bring his armies from the extreme north to the border of Israel. None other than President Ronald Reagan, a devout Christian, said many times he truly believed Russia to be Magog according to Ezekiel. What about the word Gog? Bible scholars agree that the word Gog is not an actual name, but a title. He is the ruler of the land of Magog, like a king or a czar. Ezekiel clearly says that Russia will come to the mountains of Israel in the latter years. This happened in September 2015, and never before. For the first time in history, the Russian Army, Navy, and Air Force became involved in a war in the Middle East. According to Ezekiel, Magog's armies has several allies: Persia, Kush, and Gomer and Togarmah. Iran has been known as Persia for much of its history, during the time of the prophets and beyond. Right now, Iranian troops are on the ground in Syria, fighting side by side with the Russians and the forces loyal to the regime of Bashar al-Assad. Put and Kush are the ancient names of Libya and Egypt. Egypt and Libya both suffered civil wars, and the new leadership is very friendly to the Russians. But the greatest surprise is the land known to Ezekiel as Gomer and Togarmah. The historian Flavius Josephus references Togarmah and Gomer as the people that lived on the territory of present-day Turkey. In fact, Turkish history books identify these tribes as living on their land at the time of the prophets. 3 years ago, Turkey was a strong NATO ally, but everything changed after the failed coup attempt in 2016. Now, Turkey has become increasingly hostile to NATO and the United States. It forced NATO to remove forces from its bases. It's buying weapons from Russia. It fully condemned the idea of Jerusalem becoming the capital of Israel. And in fact, right now, the Turkish army is in Syria, fighting to defeat the enemies of the Syrian dictator. The End Times Alliance, prophesied in the first verses of Ezekiel chapter 38, has already been formed. Never in the history of mankind has there been an alliance between Russia, Iran, and Turkey. Now, one final prophecy needs to be fulfilled before the start of World War III. We saw how Jeremiah predicted the destruction of Damascus in chapter 49, but there is one more thing he wrote about that has not happened yet. And I will kindle a fire in the wall of Damascus, and it shall consume the palaces of Ben-Hadad. Ben-Hadad is not an actual person, but a title. Just do one simple search online, and you will discover that Ben-Hadad is the ruler of Aram Damascus. While it is clear that Bashar al-Assad is the current ruler of Damascus, Aram is a region in Syria now known as Aleppo. The city of Aleppo was just recently recaptured by the regime of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad with the help of Iran and Russia. And Jeremiah says that soon his palace will be burning. How does this happen? Look no further than the headlines of recent months, and you see time and time again Israel calling for the assassination of the Syrian dictator. Isaiah also writes about the end of Syria's dictator. The fortified city will disappear from Ephraim, and royal power from Damascus. This is the spark that ignites World War III. Ezekiel chapter 38 states that 2/3 of Israel will be destroyed in this coming war, and those left in the Holy Lands will face grief and pain and hardship. So what happens to the United States? Will we not help Israel at its darkest hour? To answer this question, we must first find the United States in biblical prophecy. John the Apostle in the book of Revelation and Jeremiah and Isaiah talk about another end-times nation in their writings, a nation called Babylon, or Mystery Babylon. The name is deeply symbolic. Ancient Babylon was a city made great by people who came from all parts of the ancient world, just like immigrants helped make the United States the world's only superpower. And because the prophets didn't know of the existence of the North American continent at the time of the visions, they called it Mystery Babylon. Some say biblical Babylon refers to ancient Iraq. But if that is true, why do the prophets see it as a nation surrounded by waters? O thou that dwellest upon many waters, abundant in treasures, where all who had ships on the sea became rich through her wealth. While biblical Babylon has plentiful access to waters rich in resources, most of Iraq is a desert and has only a narrow stretch of coastline. Why do the prophets talk about pollution when in ancient Iraq there could be no such thing? Thou hast destroyed thy land. I have polluted mine inheritance and have given them into thine hand. Babylon mounts up to heaven and descends above the heights of the clouds. These metaphors clearly reference a nation that has discovered flight. It is obvious that Babylon, or Mystery Babylon, can't be ancient Iraq. But the prophets have more to say about this end times nation. Babylon is hailed as a queen among nations, the lady of kingdoms. According to the prophets, Babylon reigneth over the kings of the earth. It is the praise of the entire earth, and an astonishment among the nations. It is a place of great riches, and the merchants of the earth are waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies. In fact, the prophets say clearly that should something happen to Babylon, all worldwide trade would stop. The merchants of the earth will weep and mourn over her, because no one buys their cargoes anymore. It is the #1 military power, and it's called the hammer of the whole earth. Isaiah in verse 18, chapter 2, talks about how Babylon's beginning would be unique and awe-inspiring. America was created out of the former British colonies, a nation made out of many states just like the prophets foretold. Our ancestors were the first British colonists, and we speak their language. That's the reason why Jeremiah sees England like a mother to the U.S., according to verse 50, chapter 12. More so, the prophets talk about the lion that is on the sigil of the mother of Babylon. England uses the lion as its royal symbol. The last crew the prophets left us is incredibly accurate. The scripture often refers to Babylon as a woman. According to the book of Revelations, She sits atop water and has a golden cup in her right hand and a crown of 7 rays on her head. And the woman which thou sawest in that great city, which reigneth over the kings of the earth. The United Nations, in theory, reigns over all the kings of the earth and is situated in New York, the great city where you can see the Statue of Liberty. The statue is the most well-known landmark in the U.S. and the symbol of Babylon the prophets are referring to in their clues. So why, then, are they also calling it the Whore of Babylon? The sculptor of the Statue of Liberty was Auguste Bertoldi, a Mason belonging to the Great Masonic Lodge in Paris. Before beginning the Statue of Liberty project, Bertoldi was seeking permission to construct a giant statue of the goddess Ishtar. The Romans also adopted this fertility goddess, but they changed the name to Libertas in Latin, Liberty in English. Libertas is the mythological equivalent of Ishtar. Therefore, the Statue of Liberty is in fact a statue of Ishtar, the Babylonian goddess of fertility, love, and sex. According to the ancient Babylonian rituals, one could only be purified of sin after intercourse with a temple priest or priestess of Ishtar. In return for this salvation, a gift offering was needed. Ishtar was the patron mother of the temple priestesses and priests. She was the mother of what we would call today prostitution. This is why Ishtar was seen by early Christians as the Whore of Babylon. And that is why the Statue of Liberty, the symbol of America, is also called by the prophets the Whore of Babylon. Do you think it is just a coincidence that the U.S., the home of the greatest and most famous statue of Ishtar, provides 65% of pornographic movies and adult entertainment to the world? Is it just another coincidence that this is the country where sexual liberation originated and spread to the rest of the world? It's not. It's just like the scriptures foretold. For all nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. The U.S. today has the most powerful economy and military, controls worldwide commerce, is proud and arrogant, has the most developed Air Force and space program, and it is the envy of the world. It houses the Whore of Babylon. It reigns over the kings of the earth. And unfortunately for every living American, it is Mystery Babylon. This is what the prophets say about the great enemy of Babylon. For out of the north there cometh up a nation against her, which shall make her land desolate. They come from a far country, from the end of heaven, and the weapons of his indignation to destroy the whole land. Remember which country the prophet said was from the north? The same country that Ezekiel said will lead a great alliance of nations to the borders of Israel? If war happens, the United States must be the first target. That is why the prophets foretell that at the start of this war, Russia will unexpectedly use a very special weapon, the weapon of indignation, against the whole territory of the U.S., a weapon like which the world has never seen. The Holy Book shows how Babylon will feel the fury of this terrible weapon. This weapon will hit our entire country and all our defenses will be in vain. Though
Okay. So I show that just to show kind of where our nation is and that there are wars and rumors of wars occurring. I know that there's a differentiation sometimes of people, what they presume Babylon to be interpreted as in Revelations. I strongly personally feel that it is America. I think that there's too many coincidences or correlations, especially with the Statue of Liberty and such. But 2 Timothy 3 talks about this. It says, "This know also that in the last days perilous times will come," not if they come, but will come. "For men shall be lovers of their own selves, covetous, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, without natural affection, truce breakers, false accusers, incontinent, fierce despisers of those that are good, traitors, heady, high-minded, lovers of pleasure more than lovers of Yah, having a form of regard for Yah, but denying the power of Yahuwah. From such turn away. For of this sort are they which creep into houses and lead captive silly women laden with sins, led away with diverse lusts, ever learning, and never able to come to the knowledge of the truth. And when I read this verse, just several things jump out at me. But first and foremost is just, you know, where he says that we shall become lovers of our own selves. We're constantly, you know, thinking about us and how things are going to turn out for us when, as followers and believers and Kodashim and called out and set apart, we're really supposed to be focused outwardly and storing up our treasures in heaven by introducing and serving and feeding the homeless and witnessing to the lost and taking care of the widows. So we find less and less of that going on today. We have a regard for Yah, but we don't really want to get involved too much with the depth of his power, and we turn away from that. And so we definitely have been misguided by our lusts, and it does seem that we're ever learning, never able to fully come to an understanding. And that's why we have things like, say, pastors killing themselves in churches, and the church is full of addiction and infidelity and promiscuity. And it's just because we don't even have the ability to understand the truth without the Holy Spirit. We're giving ourselves away to the diverse lusts and having more love for ourselves than for holiness and the following of Yah's ways. So, Mom, did you want to say something?
No.
Okay. So this concludes the first part, but again, I wanted to remind us the reason why we set out to do this is because we strongly feel that we're called to be repairers of the breach, to expose the enemy in this present day. And again, that's why we showed the videos that we did, because it really has to do with America. If you're not from America, presentation is more, but each of our countries have their own stuff that of ancient of old. Enemy's been busy since the beginning. And so, but as the Kodashim, as the called out believers, as a whole, as unified body, we're called to be repairers of the breach. No matter what country we live in, there has been a failing of observing Torah and law, and we're going to get into all that. We've been very misinformed on what the law actually means, thinking that Jesus came and fulfilled it, so therefore it's done away with. However, that couldn't be farthest from the truth. Yeshua came to walk it out and show us it could be done. And he said, follow me. And so we're to preserve that, guard that, and protect that, and teach that.
And, you know, even though, like you said, this does focus more directly on America, I think with this latest pandemic, quote unquote, that we see all of these governments coming together in this moving towards a more one world type of governing system. And we see a lot of people being frightened into it, pushed into it, coerced into it, whatever you want to call it. So even though it does focus on America, I think we're seeing more and more how this is coming together. And the other thing I would say is, as we talk about this, and as we talk about the Luciferian and satanic background of a lot of these organizations and these people in power, one thing I think that, and which we'll get into more later as to why, but one thing I think the Christian church has fallen down in is teaching about the reality of the spiritual world. As Christians, I don't think we have any, I mean, I think I've had people tell me, well, you know, yeah, the Bible talks about that, but as long as we ignore it, they'll leave us alone. And that could
God is sovereign. God is sovereign.
Yeah, that could be not be further from the truth. If you're, I mean, it tells us we're in spiritual warfare. So if we're not fighting that warfare, then we're open to the enemy. And you said that, repairs of the breach, when you were defining breach, to look at the first one. But I think the second one's just as valid, because when we get into things we shouldn't be in, or when we ignore the enemy and let him gain ground in our life, we've actually poked holes in our defense. We've walked out from under the barrier of defense that God puts around us through obedience and acknowledging him and walking in his spirit.
Principle of blessing and cursing.
Yeah, we open up that protection, and we poke holes in that barrier that he's given us to defend us. So
yeah,
he doesn't do it to us, we do it to ourselves. So it's very important that we start learning that the spiritual realm is important, just as important or more so than the natural, and we need to start learning how to walk in the Holy Spirit and to fight in the Spirit. So
amen.
like we'll talk more about that as we go forward.
Yes, we will. Well, this concludes. Do you have anything to add?
I don't think so. I mean, I know it's pretty heavy.
It's heavy stuff.
As we get into this, and everybody's usually a little bit overwhelmed with it. So, I would say pray about it. Take it to the Lord in prayer. Pray. It's not all gloom and doom. There's good news, excellent news, wonderful news for those who are believers. And
I think I like to start off with this government piece, because I think in this present day, the government has taken the place of God.
Right.
We're looking for a king like they did back in the Old Testament. And I think many of the Christian community was hoping that they found that in Trump. And, I want to be able to clearly convey that it's only him, the government of the kingdom of heaven. Jesus said when we pray, we're to pray like this: Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be your name, your kingdom come, your will be done in earth as it is in heaven. And we're constantly looking to the government to implement the will of the Father. And that's an oxymoron. And so if we participated in supporting financially with our time, talents, and resources, the kingdom, rather than the political agenda, I believe that we could really see this nation saved. But because we put our trust in man instead of God, and we buckled under pressure and we didn't stand up for righteousness, we're now seeing the effects of that. And so I just strongly want to expose the government as not this entity that can save us. Only God can save us.
Right. And we're probably, I mean, I've heard several people talk about this, that what we're facing now is the judgment. And not because God is mean or because he's decided to judgment.
The natural cause and effect.
We brought that on ourselves. We have stepped outside of his covenant, his ways of doing things, his covenant that told us how to live and be blessed. And he told us at the same time, you have a choice, and you can have blessing in life or you can have cursing and death. And we have moved so far away from his blessings that his hand is removed, and so that covering no longer covers us as a people of God. And so we are responsible for what's happening now. Short of all believers coming together unified in mind and spirit and praying, that judgment will be worked out, because it's just it's a law, it's a natural law, cause and effect. So, but like I say, there is good news and wonderful news for those who are in him. And so hang in there with us.
You guys stick with us in these classes, because we're going to reveal the incredible, amazing things that we haven't been taught that are of him, that we now get to implement and practice and put into our understanding and it's super exciting. So like I said in the intro video, you know, if you feel like there's something missing, there is. and he's just given us such incredible mysteries. They're limitless, they're unending. Just all it requires is that we meet him and spend time with him and ask, seek, and knock, and he's faithful to reveal.
He is definitely doing what he promised to do through the Torah and the prophets. He is bringing the lost houses of Israel back together,
Yes,
and
he is.
joining those 10 tribes to Judah as one nation again. He promised to, I believe it's Jeremiah 31, Allison, in those days I can't remember, but anyway, he's definitely doing that. What he promised to do in the last days, he is fulfilling that. He never fails. He never goes back on a promise. He is true to his word. And when he says he changes not, he changes not. So hang in there with us. And thank you, Allison, for another great session.
Yay. All right. Well, I'll see you next week.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.